another episode of The Key. It's from this book, The Key, and I'm excited again to be with you and to talk about today, how did the key come to being? What happened in my life that caused me to be on a quest for personal emotional healing? You recall in the first part of the program, when I was first starting, that I wanted to build hope. I told you that I could help you. I told you that I could make a difference in your life because of what had happened to me. I was able at that time to go ahead and share with you some of the problems, why people are not living the abundant life, or what happens when life doesn't work well. And so I shared with you that emotional problems come from childhood. And then I was able to share with you that I have solution. God gave me and my wife, who I explained to you had a heart attack in September of 2021, and eventually went home to be with the Lord after 97 days in the hospital. And we discovered the key together, and the key to emotional healing. And that was based on, as I told you, it was based on a prophecy that I got in 2007, that my wife and I actually have the key to the body of Christ. Well, today, what I really want is to share with you my personal testimony. What happened to me that caused me to be on a quest to find personal freedom, to find freedom from being so controlling and so fearful and in such bondage. And it was very difficult childhood for me. As you recall, I had Jessica on, and Jessica shared about her testimony. I had Ophelia on, and she shared about her testimony. And in each case, they shared with you what they've been through, and then they shared with you how the key and the different parts of the key, the two parts, there's really two parts to the key: soul redemption and reparenting. Soul redemption is an individual one-on-one time in which I shared with you that according to the way God designed our brains, that we can actually, I worked with people and help them to actually change what they believe. And then there's reparenting groups, and reparenting groups are what we discovered can happen with a group of Christians, not usually more than 9 or 10, and they will actually, according to Luke 4:18, they're anointed. We're all anointed because we're Christians, because we've accepted Jesus as Lord, to be able to heal each other in the group if it's structured properly. So that was the solution. I gave you the problem. I'm going to share more about my observations next week, but for right now, I'm going to share with you what happened to me, because what happened to me actually was the root problem of my life. And I had lots of problems. I want to tell you, I had lots of problems. I'm going to explain some of that to you right now. I can remember as far back as 2 years of age, about two and a half maybe. And my father was a doctor, and he was a angry doctor because of what had happened to him as a child. He could get triggered pretty easily. He was a narcissistic personality, and he made everything about himself. But he did want to help people to not suffer the way he had suffered when he lost his best friend at 7 years of age, his younger brother. And his younger brother died of scarlet fever. So he became a doctor instead of his father actually disowned him for not becoming an attorney. If you can imagine that, that's some serious control. But he went on to be a doctor, and he was a doctor in Pasadena, California for 50 years. And so he was a doctor, had graduated from medical school and went into the Army, and he was stationed in Texas, and I was born in Austin, Texas. And then my mother got pneumonia, and in those days, the thing that they had for pneumonia was an antibiotic, and the antibiotic was a antibiotic that would help people with pneumonia and scarlet fever and other things like that. And so my mother got pneumonia, and he gave her a tremendous amount of antibiotics. And he thought he was going to lose her, but because he gave her so much, I think it was 50,000 units. I mean, that's about as much as you can give. I mean, you give that to a horse. And but she made it, and he became a great big believer all of his life in antibiotics, given by injection or given by oral, eventually pills. So I was about two and a half. We'd moved to California. We were living in Altadena, California, and I ended up with what he thought was pre-pneumonia. And so what happened is that he, being a doctor and having the ability to be able to give injections, of course, he gave me an injection as this little boy, and it hurt like heck. I mean, the needles were that long, and they were very not, needles now are so thin you can barely even feel them. But needles then were very big, ugly, and hurt. And it hurt me. And so I was like, oh, that hurt. And so about 2 weeks later, what ends up happening is I got to have another follow-up shot and follow-up injection of this antibiotic. And so I see him, and he's in the refrigerator, grabs the vial, and he's got the needle and the syringe, and he's filling it up with antibiotic, and I'm like, I'm out of here. So I run, he runs after me and tackles me, pulls my pants down, and slams this needle into my bottom. And I'm 2.5, and he slammed it, and it hurt. It really hurt. And I was crying, and he was upset, and he started yelling at me. Imagine that. He started yelling at me like I was doing something to hurt him. And so he started yelling at me, and he yelled at me, and it was very, very damaging to me because I no longer could trust him. I no longer had any trust in my father because this hurt so bad. He yelled and screamed at me, and what I did is I triggered him. I later found out. I didn't know that, of course, at the time. I didn't even know it when I got older. But what happened after that was what Satan put into motion. Now looking back, I can understand the whole plan of the devil. Was my father was such a believer in antibiotics that he actually, I would have to go every summer to get these booster shots, or these shots that were all combined, anti this and anti that, so that it was a booster shot. And it hurt like heck because there was so much liquid involved in it. And so, I became very afraid. Year 3, I was very afraid. Year 4, I got more afraid. And eventually, I had to go every summer. I eventually got to the point where I didn't believe I was going to get an injection or a shot. I believed I was going to my death. And you say, well, how can that happen? I built up And the devil helped me build up such a fear, it became a phobia. I was terrified. And you would have thought that my parents would have figured out that something's wrong with Frank, something's wrong. But they didn't. They just kept going on because a lot of parents don't really understand their children. And so I became hypervigilant. I became hypervigilant to the point where I tried to avoid every summer. I could know that was coming, but my mother participated with my father, and she actually would trick me. She'd say, we're going to the bookstore, and we'd end up at the doctor's office, because my father, because I screamed and yelled and went ballistic, my father quit giving me the shots, and he thought, well, his pediatrician doctor friend should give them to me. So I had to go to his office, though, where his doctor had an office also, and go get a shot. Well, it was so bad, and it was so hard that I was really terrified. I would tell my mother when when it became obvious, I would try to hold on in the car. I was in the waiting room and I tried to hold on to the chair and they'd pry me off. It was bad. I mean, I can't even tell you how bad it was. And so what happened is that I had to do this every summer. By the age of 12, I've got a full-blown phobia. I'm absolutely, totally terrified of needles, terrified of getting a shot, and it was very, very hard. But what happened is my father was very abusive, and he ended up one night telling me to go to my room and forfeit my dinner, and he ended up pushing me against the closet doors and yelling and screaming at me, and I'll explain a little bit more of that. But what I did is it was so unfair that I got so frustrated that I actually took my fist and slammed it into my closet door and put a hole in it. My closet was it was not a normal closet. It was a double insulate or double formed, if you will. And so I should have broken every bone in my hand, but somehow I didn't. And so when he did it the next time, I told him, he started to push me and started to abuse me and started to yelling and screaming at me. And I rose up. This is about 13 years of age. I rose up and I told him if he ever touched me again, I'd knock his face off. And I meant it. I would have killed him. If we got into a fight, I would have just pummeled him. So what happened is he never touched me again. It was amazing. It was like almost miraculous. Anger back at him. And I found out that most narcissistic people are bullies. So the next time I was going to have to go get a shot, I wasn't so concerned because I had something in my toolbox. I had something that you may end up using sometimes and wondering, why do I do that? Well, I ended up getting angry at the doctor, and I told the doctor, if he ever touched me, I'd knock him through the window. And that was the end of that. No more shots. No more shots. I had a new best friend. My new best friend was anger. And I was so angry, it was amazing. Somebody cut me off on the freeway. I would flip him the bird and run after him. That was before I really was a Christian, so that's my excuse. But what ended up happening is that before that time when I stood up to my father, every dinner from the age of 4, 5, 6, every dinner was interrupted by my father picking a fight with me, my sister, or my mother. And he would do it every night. He came home, he had 2 bourbon and sodas, because he'd had a long day at the office. We didn't eat dinner until usually 7, 8 o'clock at night. I did my homework, and my sister did too. And what happened is he was relaxing. Problem is that relaxing drove him to a point where he'd pick a fight with one of us at dinner. We didn't get to finish our dinner. This happened every night. Every night. So there was no security. I was totally insecure. I was totally afraid. I was terrified. And what happened is this happened every night. My sister would be sent to her room. I'd be sent to my room. My mother would cry. He would pretend to take a movie of her. Not a feeling man. Couldn't love a post, as I really later really understood. It wasn't his fault, just like it's not your fault for what happens with you. But it was very, very detrimental to me and my sister. And my poor sister today is paranoid, schizophrenic, and OCD. Fortunately, because I pushed back on him and because my sister didn't do that. And so she took it and took it and took it and took it. And because she did, and he yelled and screamed at her, pulled her hair, was very abusive. Has mental problems today, and she's not in an institution because she can get by, but she has no life. At least I have a life. And it was horrible. So this happened every time. I ended up in a situation where I was I was so afraid of everything. I had no security. I was totally afraid. We had 2 acres in Pasadena, and we had horses. My father wanted to have horses. So we had 2 horses, and we had a gully, kind of where a stream had come through there. And I had to go over and feed the horses when it was dark, when daylight savings like we're in right now. I had to go over and feed the horses. And I was so terrified to go down into that gully because somebody's going to get me. Because I had been gotten by my father so many times that I thought somebody's going to get me. I lived in abject fear. They took me to a psychiatrist when I was about 8 or 9 to try to find out why I was such a mess. I wet my bed until I was 14. Why? Because I just was a mess. I was totally a mess. And so I'm coming into grade school, and I go to a school, and the teachers are very intimidating. So they're treating me just like my father did. Very intimidating. It was a private school, and they actually paddled kids. I didn't get paddled, but I was scared to death of everything. Then I went to high school. I went to a private high school, and there were some teachers there that were very intimidating. So I'll suffice it to say, I had a major problem with authority. Major problem with authority. And so I was so abused and so terrified and so fearful of everything. I actually came to a point where I was so convinced, totally convinced, my father treated me the way he treated me because he hated me. Because he had to hate me. You don't treat a son like this if you don't hate him. And so I was convinced, and I was, I'm certainly not valued, but didn't see myself as valuable, important, and worthy. That may be your problem too, because most people that have been abused in childhood do not see themselves as valuable, important, and worthy. If they've been neglected, it's a bigger problem because then they have a challenge even knowing they exist. If they've been raised if you were raised by emotionally unavailable parents, you have a problem. You're always looking to be validated. You're looking for somebody or a group or something to make you feel like you're okay. We all need to matter. We all need to matter. That's how God created us. We need to matter. And if we have been treated and abused, now what is abuse? Abuse can be physical. I was abused physically. I have people that when I had the church for 12 years, they had been beaten by their father until they were bloody. I've had people that were yelled at, screamed at like I was, and it's very, very debilitating to be yelled at and screamed at and told that you're no good, you're not worth anything, and that may have happened to you, and if it did, I really feel for you. We do, I'm going to, however, as you continue to watch these programs, you're going to find answers for those kinds of problems. And I've had great results. And you heard from Jessica and Ophelia, and I could have brought on 20 more people. But the key to this is about me, that I was so afraid. And the other abuse that can happen, and God forbid this happened to you, because it's very hard. I have a number of women that I've had in groups and actually worked with that have been sexually abused. They've been molested, they've been raped. It's been very, very difficult for them. So abuse is real. Satan is the cause of it, but parents are the ones that bring it on us because they're triggered. They have emotional issues they've never dealt with. And that's one of the things that keeps us stuck. If you feel stuck at all, it's because you are living with unresolved emotional pain. And I live with unresolved emotional pain to the point where my father hated me, so I hated me. I hated me. It wasn't just believing I was defected, I hated myself. You may hate yourself. And some of you may even, hate yourself enough to do away with yourself. That's the plan of the devil. And I didn't have the guts. I was so afraid of any kind of pain that I didn't have the guts to cut myself or, put a gun to my head or anything like that. Felt like it many times, but no, I was too sensitive and too beat up, but not beat up enough to have those kind of drastic results. So what ends up happening is I end up marrying a woman who can make me look good. You may have married a woman, or you may have married a man that makes you look good. I was very, very insecure. As a teenager, I tried to do things, I did things that were, just really foolish and stupid, and almost got myself in trouble racing motorcycles and almost killed myself racing motorcycles. I probably had a death wish. And so, like I said, I married a woman that would make me look good, very beautiful woman. And we had 2 kids. And then I took my anger and hatred towards myself out on my kids. Not the thing to do. And my kids suffer today. And it's really hard. It's really difficult. You may be doing the same thing. And so if that's happening with you, just know that we're going to talk in the weeks ahead about how you can get out of that and not stop doing that. So I would do things out of my hurt and woundedness, if you will. I would go to anger in nanoseconds. So with my children, I went to anger. I was abusive. If you are hurt, you're going to hurt people. And so I was abusive. And what ended up happening is that my kids suffered. But then my wife actually divorced me, and we ended up in a situation where she took the kids, and we were divorced. She didn't want to continue to ride the financial roller coaster that I was on because I wanted to prove I was valuable, as important and worthy, and I realized that the best way to do that was to go ahead and make a lot of money. And so I was absolutely driven, insanely driven to make money, to prove my value, my worth, and my importance, believing all the time that I wasn't valuable, I wasn't important, and I wasn't worthy. So I had a very rocky marriage. It wasn't easy for her. It wasn't easy for me. My kids, as I said, I was abusive. And I would go into anger fits, and it would be very, very difficult. In fact, I'm going to share with you a little bit into the next week's program. I'm going to share with you some of the triggers, that emotional triggers that I had and anger fits that I had, and how it affected my relationship with my second wife. And it was the reason, my anger was the reason that I actually discovered, and she and I discovered the key together. So next week, I'm going to finish up how anger had affected me in such a way that I cried out to God and I said, God, I need help. I've got an anger problem that I can't control. I've been through deliverance, I've been through inner healing, I've been through behavior modification and therapy. If you've been that way, if you've done all that, then you're going to have some answers coming to you next week when we talk about the key and how the key can set you free, unlock your prison that you're living in, and show you the goodness of God. I'm going to share that with you next week, the goodness of God and how He came to me and helped me to understand first and then deal with my anger issue. And so I'm not angry anymore. As a matter of fact, I very seldom trigger. Little bit here and there, but very seldom. And if I can do it, you certainly can do it. And that is the key that I'm going to share with you in the days ahead, in the weeks ahead. Thank you for being here.